All right, welcome to episode 32 of the PoddyC. This week, it's just me and Dorky because Max is playing his Tarisland game. Dorky, did you get to watch any of Max doing his world first race in that game, Prague thing?
Yeah, I've been practicing for TGP, and during my practices, I just like tune into Max's stream where he's playing 50,000 ads an hour. But I I try my best to appreciate Max's content, and I'm out there to support his content. So it's actually been kind of exciting watching him play Tarisland because it seems like he's been pretty into the game. Like at first, I was just thinking, man, this looks like some dog shit weeb game, but seems like he's been having a good time. And like
Yeah,
him being able to like be in raid while raid leading or whatever he would normally be doing, it just seems to be like a refreshing pace for him.
yeah, you could kind of tell like he's gaming. I think outside of any sponsored requirement he has, he's going beyond that, and that's how you can tell because whenever streamers get like a sponsored game and it's like, oh yeah, it seems like they're having fun. Oh, they streamed it for exactly 2 hours or like exactly 4 hours. Like, okay, well,
Yeah.
but then he went, I think, well over however, because earlier today it was like they were racing against Echo, right? And like they were both going for a certain amount of time, and then Liquid and Max and stuff just kept going. And yeah, I assume that's just because they're actually really enjoying the raids in that game, which surprised me. Watching it, I was thinking like, this looks okay, but I don't really see the appeal. Like, I don't really see myself downloading it. Although, I guess it's a mobile game too, so maybe that's like the big appeal, right? Like crossplay, a nice mobile MMO you can play on your phone and your
Mm.
computer. That does have some appeal to me, but I don't know. I still, you just watching it, I was like, I don't know if I want to download this.
Wait. So are you saying that like because it's cross-platform that it's more appealing to you?
Like the fact that you can also play it on your phone, but then the fact that it
Yeah,
looks like a
I see.
mobile game is minus points,
Okay, I see what you're
right?
saying.
But
Yeah,
it's plus points that you can
right.
play it on your phone. So
Yeah, because like normally I find people have this stigma against games that are mobile games or like they're cross-platform. I don't. I mean, I like understand it because people automatically think mobile game equals trash, but I really wish there wasn't that stigma that like that a mobile game could be good because I feel like there has been a lot of good mobile games in the past, like not necessarily the same quality of game as like World of Warcraft, obviously, but
dude,
games like a lot of games that I played back in the past when I was just on my commute to school, those were bangers.
Diablo Immortal for me is a big example of that. Like that game is actually a
Really,
good game. It's just got
really, I actually didn't
horrifying
play it.
monetization that makes it unplayable. But like the
Okay.
core of the experience of playing it on your phone is actually like it's really good. If that game just cost $60 and I could just buy it and then it was reasonably set up and didn't have
Hmm.
like microtransactions or whatever in it, I would pay. I'd buy that game for that price and play it on my phone all the time. It's just like it's trying to milk you for money, and any game that's like aggro trying to milk you for money all the time kind of hurts my enjoyment of it. I only play those games free to play so that I can you know like I set that restriction for myself, and then if it's still fun, I can play it and enjoy it. I've done that with like Clash Royale in the past, that kind of game, but Marvel Snap as well, phone games. So but yeah,
Yeah.
that is, I think, an unfortunate thing that is tied to mobile gaming. The is always the like predatory and in your face monetization that like I don't mind paying for games, but I don't want to be reminded of paying money for stuff all the time while I'm playing. And I definitely would rather just pay a flat amount or a sub fee or something rather than like every single time I have an objective in the game, I have to decide would I rather spend 1 hour or $20 to, make this happen or whatever. That's like really annoying to keep thinking about.
Hmm. Yeah, it didn't used to be this way too, because like I remember when mobile games first started to become like a big thing. Like remember back in the days of iPod, holy moly, back when like
You
that
could
was
get
the
an
biggest thing
app
ever.
that
By
like
like,
it would
yep.
show you like a half empty beer thing on your iPhone, and then you'd turn and the gyroscope would show the beer like moving around or whatever. It would look like you were drinking it out of the phone. And you could get like
That, but
a flashlight that
yeah,
was just the front of your phone, and a
that
lightsaber.
was the craziest thing ever back then.
Those are so cool. There was there was that app that cost like $1,000 that just said "I'm rich" or whatever that a couple people bought, and then they took it off the app store. Anyways,
Oh,
sorry, I
I think I
interrupted
remember that.
your
No, yeah,
point.
but I
Yeah.
was gonna say like there were actually fun games back in
Yeah.
mobile gaming. Like I remember playing these RPGs. I can't remember what it was called. It was like Legend of something. I don't remember what it was called, but like it was like a series one, two, and three, and they were actually really fun to play when I was just like screwing around on my commute, as I've said, to school back in like high school and college.
Yeah.
And it felt like mobile games were looking like it was gonna be the future, right? Like something that was super accessible to players, but they just went down that whole hole of just being extremely predatory and really heavy on the monetization. But it's funny too, because like I know like I don't really play a whole lot of like actually I don't play any mobile games, but I know in Genshin Impact, which is like arguably one of the biggest mobile games of all time, it's super heavily monetized, but at the same time the players feel justified in their spending because like whatever money they put into the game actually like spits it back out. Like they come out with crazy amounts of content. They have like all these different trailers. They're constantly pumping out stories and it's just like a ton of high quality stuff. And it seems like the players actually don't mind it, which is a very interesting phenomenon and I don't really see that anywhere else. It's actually kind of like PoE, right? Like doesn't PoE have a supporter pack or something that's like a ton of money?
Oh yeah, dude. PoE, you can. It's like once a year. They do new core supporter packs that go up to like $500, and they'll send you art and posters and a shirt and also like a bunch of cosmetics and stuff in game. And then every season they'll do like two different series of supporter packs, each of which have a 30, 60, and $90 like level. And those give you like the equivalent in store points. So you could also you get like for the $30 pack, it's like you get all of these special cosmetics and $30 of store points that you can then buy skill effects or transmog or whatever for. So it's like it's a good deal, but it's all cosmetics, which and they come up with some like they cook on those cosmetics. It's like, oh, do you want a ring that tracks how many steps you take on your character? Do you want one that tracks how many of each currency you pick up? Do you want like a tracker of how long you've spent in each map? Those ones are kind of pay to win, I guess, a little bit. But then mostly it's just like, oh, you want a back attachment that feeds on the energy of each enemy you kill, and like something that explodes when you die or something, and like has a fuse trailing behind you. And yeah, I don't know, that game. I've never had a problem with monetization in that game because it is just it's like all cosmetics, or again, there's like a little minor quality of life. You buy kind of inventory space, which is there's stuff that's like little bits of power, but if you spend $20 in that game,
It's like a one-time
your hard
purchase,
set
right?
to you're set like for
Yeah.
98% of the game, and then like if you want to really min max and play the trade leagues, you can and become like somebody who plays the auction house type thing in WoW over in PoE. Then you do need to spend a little bit more to get like all the stash tabs, a bunch of extra ones, but it doesn't. It's like not. It's predatory, I guess, a little bit in the sense of there's a mystery box they do that has like cosmetics in it, and mystery boxes I think are inherently they prey on a little bit of gambling stuff on people, but
Oh yeah, like the loot box. Yep.
I have a really hard time being mad at a company that's like it's pretty much all cosmetics. Like there's no power being sold and the game is free. So that is like I don't know. I give them a lot of points for that, right? Like if they had some of that, if they had mystery box and the game cost money and had a sub and sold power or whatever, I would hate all of that. But I don't know. It's like I think it's overall pretty ethical way to make money. I mean, I don't know. It's hard, right? Like every mobile games in general, right? Like there's a lot of really talented devs out there making a lot of, again, like Diablo Immortal, like good games for phones, but then it turns out that the way to make the most money on phone games is to do the awful monetization practices that almost all of them do. That's really sad. I agree, because I agree with you. Like 15 years ago, I would have been like, oh yeah, phone gaming, it's going to be poggers, but I don't know. It sort of turns out that they make the most money from aiming it at kind of a broad audience of people that don't really engage with games the way we do, where it sort of really nukes our enjoyment of stuff if it's pay to win. Turns out that's not actually as many people as I would have hoped that have their enjoyment ruined by that.
Yeah, like I actually never hear people complain about PoE. I've only heard good things, and like the fact that you don't ever see an Asmongold video pop up saying something super negative about PoE goes to show that like it's not that big of a deal. And
Yeah.
yeah, like with the whole yeah, I mean just like with WoW in general, you know how you were talking about how they're appealing to more of a broader audience. I've always wondered how that's affected WoW. Like, how do you think WoW should be? Whether it's like gonna be more appealing to a broader audience, or should it be like more specialized towards the specific WoW nerds? Because MMOs in the past have always been more of a niche category where like it's only the nerds who played it. If you played MMOs, you were kind of like not really like the usual gamers who would play FPS or like whatever was mainstream at the time.
Yeah. I remember it was like, in middle school or high school or whatever, you didn't want to tell people you played WoW, right? Like that was
Oh no, even before WoW, like if you were playing like say like
yeah.
EverQuest or Ultima or like like all these other MMORPGs, MMOs were just not the thing that
Those were
people were really
yeah.
playing.
It was like I mean, WoW's biggest innovation was making it more casual friendly, right? Like it was
Yep.
taking EverQuest and stuff and being like, okay, well, what if we make this more accessible? Obviously, you look at Classic now and you look at it and you're like, this isn't an accessible MMO, but at the time, it was a huge step up from almost all of the existing ones, right? I don't know. I think that is a strength of WoW is that like making it easy for people to get into the game is really good, and making it have a compelling way to play it on a casual basis, I think, is really good. So stuff that I think they're doing well in this is like follower dungeons, delves as an idea. Again, the actual implementation may or may not hit. I think that is certainly still open to discussion, and we'll see how it actually plays out. But the idea of trying to make something that's like, hey, these are like 10-minute adventures with 1 to 5 people that you do on your own schedule, and it fits into the seasonal and weekly, Great Vault and seasonal progression and stuff of our expansion. That's now for you if you're somebody who doesn't want to do any of the more organized stuff in the game. I think that's really smart. I think when you look at like people getting into WoW and getting overwhelmed is definitely something that happens, especially like, retail, you boost a character, you buy one of the bundles or whatever of the game, it comes with a character boost, you boost a character, you've got 30 abilities that you're trying to learn and put on your bar and stuff. Your UI is like, it's much better with the UI overhaul in Dragonflight, but it's still kind of bricked, right? It's still like overwhelming. And then you go into Valdrakken and there's 30 mobs with a quest over their head, and 2 of them are important, and you can't tell them apart from the others. Like, I do think that's something that was bad for the new player experience this expansion. But I think Blizzard agree with that because they, I think, are really trying to hone down on like, let's make some icons to show you actually where you're supposed to go if you're a new player. The buttons, the amount of buttons in the game, I think it's always going to be kind of the most intimidating part is like, oh, my character has, 20 or 30 abilities. That's a lot, right? Compared to MOBAs that have 4. But I don't think that's something like, I know Asmongold for a while had the cut every class down to 10 or something take, which I don't think.
Yeah.
I think that what you do is you shave the complexity everywhere else, and you say, okay, that's the thing that is about WoW, is that these classes have a lot of abilities.
I was actually having that exact discussion today when we were watching Max play Tarisland. I was just like, talking with my teammates and I was like talking about like how like all the game has a lot less buttons and like the pros and cons. And I do feel like in a sense it's not that big of a deal because you do have complexity elsewhere. Like I don't know too much about Tarisland, but it seems like there's only 8 abilities maybe, and there seems to be depth in the gameplay. We probably need Max to like chime in on that, but there's definitely like ways you could make the game more interesting and complicated in other ways.
I
Because
mean,
there are
Liquid spent
a
hours
lot.
progging a boss, right? Like that can't happen if
Yeah,
there's only 4 abilities and no depth, right?
right. Because like there's always the interactions with your abilities and like how they work, and probably are a lot of filler buttons that could go away. Like I was playing Guardian Druid on beta, and I'm sure you tuned in while I was playing some of that yesterday.
Yeah, I saw you were trying out the build where you shift out of bear form.
No, okay, dude, look. Macros, man. I don't know why the macro wasn't working on beta. So, like, look, it's gonna happen, right? I'm gonna fat finger. My Bearform keybind is Control F, and my Iron Fur keybind is F. So
Okay.
naturally, when I'm just like hitting like control modifier plus something, and I'm just mashing my F fervently, because that's how you play Guardian Druid, right? Like you gotta just mash your iron for. Well,
Yeah.
when I'm doing that, I like it sometimes just shifts me out of bear form, so like it just happens. There's no macro to protect me since it's broken on beta. But
Yeah.
that aside, the point is they could remove some of the filler buttons. Like I have swipe and maul, and they're just useless with my build. It's like it's so weird. Like I don't know if you're watching how I play it. I was like literally pressing mango, thrash, and moonfire only, nothing else. That was my entire rotation, and it was actually kind of fun to play. There was something super cathartic about like just going into big pulls and just mashing my three buttons and doing really well with it. But there's like still some complexity with how all your buttons interact, since like usually you have one button that might have like multifunction, and the buttons that don't do as much could probably go like rushing Jadewind for Brewmaster or
And they are
Rising Sun King.
removing.
Like that's not particular.
They are.
Yeah,
They have
they've done
proved
a
a lot
great
of that
job with it
stuff.
actually. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
think Red Paladin isn't Red Paladin one of the classes that like feels so much better to play nowadays compared to the past.
Yeah. I
I
mean,
don't know too much about it.
I think a lot of specs are down now to, they have trimmed a lot of the kind of, expel harm kind of buttons. A lot of those sorts of things are getting, baked in or procking off of you pressing another thing, or, instead of having two cooldowns, there's one cooldown that now does both of them or something. Like White Tiger
Oh, and Holy
statue.
Decay actually.
Yeah, on Holy Decay as well. They
You know how
proved
yeah they
that as
baked it.
well.
Yeah, that actually feels so good. By the way,
Yeah.
I've been playing some Unholy on beta, and man, I actually really like Unholy.
But I think the harder part to get rid of is like you still just have like 10 random utility abilities in your spell book that are like, like, oh, I've got a Purge, a Soothe, Stampeding Roar.
Those are fine in my opinion. Like
Yeah,
I like flavorful buttons that just
I agree. I don't
do
think get rid
something
of them.
special.
I just think,
Yeah,
that the spell book being multiple pages is kind of unavoidable if we're going to have those.
right.
Yeah.
But it's more so along the lines of like those buttons that like don't really do too much, and they kind of like clutter up your rotation, because there are some classes with too many plates to spin. Like I've been hearing that thrown around a lot, where some classes feels like I don't know if you feel this way about any particular spec, but there are some classes where it feels like, oh, like I gotta like keep this on cooldown, but then this other cooldown comes up, so I have to like think about like, do I put this on cooldown or that on cooldown? But then I also got this proc all of a sudden, which means like this third button I gotta press is also lighting up. So like you just get overloaded with too many plates to spin. Like
Yeah.
there's like a situational proc that you have to think about, or maybe not even proc, but like a situational cooldown coming up, or proc, or something along the lines of that.
Yeah.
And it feels like there are a lot of specs that are kind of like that, where resource isn't as impactful, and you don't sit down for a second and let your resources regenerate or whatever. Because like that's been unholy for, or DK in general. Like DK in general for the longest time has been that class where you spend your runes and then you kind of like sit a little bit for your runes and like think about like where you want to use the rest of your runes. And same with like energy specs. Energy specs, you have to be very deliberate with your energy expenditure, but it just doesn't feel that way as much now, where it's like you're constantly juggling between different abilities that are coming up or procs.
Yeah, they've done that with like Serve as well. They've been, going in and trying to kind of tweak the tensions in the spec. I think you've definitely identified something that is very very likely to be a problem in a spec is if you have, two things pulling you in a different direction at the same time, right? Like, oh, I have this cooldown that makes me want to do this cooldown that makes me want to do this, or like I need to spend these procs, but I also need to press this, right? And it's
And it's
it
like a
can be
whole
tough,
priority
right?
system.
Yeah, and then it's like, like Windwalker. Sometimes you get these things in Windwalker in previous versions where it's like, oh, I have a Dance of Chi-Ji proc, but I need to press my Fist of Fury right now. But if I press Fist of Fury right now, I might get another Dance of Chi-Ji proc and munch my proc. But if I press Spinning Crane Kick instead, then my Whirling Dragon Punch I'm not going to be able to press, because by the time I press my Fist of Fury, my Rising Sun Kick's going to be back up or something, and I won't have enough chi to do it because I just Rising Sun Kicked or whatever. And it's, you get in these spots where it's like, I have to pick between these two different options, and both of them are bad for different reasons. And obviously in that spot, there's a correct answer rotationally, right? Like, oh, I'm supposed to choose this because it's more DPS in theory, but it leads to you feeling that, that you've missed out on something your spec is supposed to do.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's a great way of putting it.
Yeah.
It definitely feels like they've been improving big time on that. I mean, they've addressed it in many of their blue posts.
Yeah,
going
Serve
over,
is a great example of it.
class reworks.
Like Serve has this tension with so Mongoose Fury is it's a buff that you get when you Mongoose Bite, and it stacks in stacks, but it doesn't increase duration. So the idea is like you do one Mongoose Bite, now you've got 16 seconds or however long of a more damage on Mongoose Bite. So if you can do like a bunch of Mongoose Bites, you'll eventually have the capped stacks of it, and then you just spam these big damage Mongoose Bites, and that's pretty cool. You're doing big dam, and then it expires, and then you do other stuff, and you come back, and whenever you're ready to start again, you start spamming Mongoose Bites again. But there's also Tip of the Spear that's like, hey, you got to weave some kill commands in there, and that creates this spot where you're in these windows, and it's like, okay, well, I want a Mongoose Bite, and I want a kill command. So what Blizzard did in the last week's build was they were like, okay, we're just going to change Mongoose Fury to a maintenance buff, right? Where it's just, you press this once every 10 seconds, you keep your stacks. And that kind of killed the identity of it. So instead they've come up in this build with, they've reverted that, and they now have a really clever solution, which is just kill command gives you an extra global's worth of Mongoose Fury duration. So it extends that. So now you're in these spots and it's like, okay, I press my kill command and I get that global back of Mongoose Fury extended. Yeah. So now the tension is kind of resolved in a way that doesn't remove the identity of Mongoose Fury. So that was a cool. They've been doing some good cooking with these different specs. I think really thinking about them through that lens.
Yeah, they've said similarly with Pharaoh Druid Energy, for example, and
energy specs are a big example of like energy specs and RP specs. There's so many where you either are always capped or always empty because you just have these spots in your rotation where it's like, yeah, it's more important to do this than it is to avoid overcapping energy.
Yeah, they're trying to make energy more meaningful, and the exact same with DK. Although I feel like they haven't exactly captured that feeling with DK just yet. Maybe it's just because of like Sand Lane. I mean, I haven't really played with Frost DK, and apparently Frost DK is like doing significantly better, but there has been that issue for the longest time, like I've said with DK, where you're overflowing with resources nonstop, and it just makes it a whole lot less fun to play. And I'm sure Max probably has a lot to say about this too, because he also plays DK, and he's also said the same. Like I've agreed with him where it's been such a big problem, but it's good to see that like Blizzard is actually making active measures to reduce these problems, and like this feeling of you're just stuck between all these different procs or cooldowns that you have to keep on cooldown.
Yeah, I've been feeling pretty encouraged. Now, there was also the big Shaman change this week as well, which I don't know, I'm kind of reminded of the M+ side of things where they were like, we're not going to change affixes, we're not going to change affixes. Okay, here's the affix overhaul, right? I guess they did the brief level 4 affix row first before they came up with the big affix overhaul, but it's kind of like with raid buffs, they were like, we're going to find something for Shaman other than a raid buff. We're going to find something other than a raid buff. And now they've just given it a raid buff, and they took away Ret Aura as well. So it's like,
they're doubling down hard.
Yeah. We're getting close to a world where every class has one raid buff. And that is so much better in my opinion than a world where 80% of classes have one raid buff and then one randomly has 2 and then a couple have 0. Obviously, there's still like DK, Evoker as well. I would say I think the Evoker raid buff is pretty fake. It's like Evoker has good utility, so you're bringing also just 2 Augs are required for world first level raiding, but that kind of stops being true once you get out of the range of guilds that are doing the spreadsheet cringe with it.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, Evoker does have a lot of extremely useful utility that can be.
Certainly.
I mean, yeah, like because I'm curious how people will figure out how to utilize things like Wordstone. I'm sure there'll be like more applications that people will find that will make evokers eventually.
We use it on M+ all the time, right? Like
exactly. Yeah. I mean, they're kind of like warlocks in a way, like where they don't necessarily have a raid buff, but they do bring a lot of valuable things to your raid.
That's true. Yeah, I guess when we talk about raid buffs, nobody ever mentions warlock as not having one. I guess you could count health stones as a raid buff, kind of, but it's like health stones in Gateway, right? Are just so often useful that you count them in there. Whereas DK, grips aren't that, right? Like grips are good,
It feels bad, yeah.
but it feels bad to be a DK because like 80% of fights grips do nothing. Like 10% of fights they're pretty good, and then 10% of fights they're just insane. And on those fights everybody's like, oh yeah, I want my DK here, but you just don't feel the job security in a way that like a warlock doesn't have a raid buff technically, but it does have job security from health stones and gateways.
It's also kind of criminal how Blood DK always just takes that spot of the DK. Because, like, as a DPS DK in raid, oftentimes, I feel like, why am I even here when you can just have a Blood DK doing all the gripping job much
Yeah,
better? They
well,
have
because it's
two
really hard
grips
for
on a shorter CD.
It's just really hard for like single grip to ever be needed, right? It's like mass grip is huge, grippy hands is huge. Although if you're using that as a DPS DK, now it's kind of griefing your damage a little bit. And then if anything that would be single grippable, you can just use like a big knockback. You can thunderstorm it or whatever. Like there's other stuff you can do for almost everything that you just need a single grip for. Yeah.
In fact, when was the last time a DK DPS was specifically brought for grip and not a tank DK? Because like there's been times where you would just bring a third tank and it would just be a Blood DK for that job, right?
Yeah. Even like Soul Render, you'd have a tank swap to Blood for that fight, even if you weren't playing Blood that tier, which you usually didn't. I don't think there really is an example of like, oh, we need a DK, let's bring a DPS DK, right? It's like, oh, we need a Blood DK is pretty common, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's also AMZ as well, but that is also kind of fake. Like,
Especially
it's
the
nice.
DPS one.
It's nice to have an AMZ, but that's also weaker on DPS compared to Blood, yeah. And it's I don't know. It's like not something you'd ever bring a DK for, right? It's something you use if you have a DK, but it's not ever something where it's like you can't do this fight without AMZ because you could just play barrier in that spot or rally to a lesser extent or Symbol of Hope, personals, that kind of stuff. DK Shaman were in the like worst spot, and now it's definitely DK that are the outlier on the bottom end of the raid buff pack, but they're less far down than Shaman were, at least. But
yeah, I mean, because like the Shaman always stinks, but at least DK was like it's always been on the pretty decent side, and not to mention they're like basically unkillable, which is a huge plus for DK. But I mean, it feels like there are easy solutions though, because if you look at the PvP talents for DK, they have Unholy Aura and Decomp Aura. I'm sure they could like probably cook up something with either one of those auras and give it to the class.
Yeah, I think that would be nice. I think another thing would just put Gorfien's Grip on the class tree instead of the Spec tree. Like people have been saying that for ages, but you just don't need that for like Blood doesn't need that. That could be a DK wide thing. That would be better, I think. And then you'd at least be able to play like Frost or Unholy on Fire. I can get that benefit too.
Yeah. What have people been saying about the Ret Aura removal? By the way, I've heard a lot of complaints.
I think it's good. I don't know. I don't think any class having 2 raid buffs was good, right? Like that,
I agree.
That was but of course, like if you're a Ret Paladin that had a spot in a raid, or Prot Paladin that had a spot in a raid because you had Ret Aura before, right? Like now there's only one Paladin spot, and it's historically it's defaulted to the Holy Paladin, right? Like Holy Paladins have been in pretty much every tier, so there's no reason it has to be that way going forward, but if historical trends continue, that this may lead to a huge reduction in the amount of Ret Pallies than you would have seen. But I still think it's good. Like, it's kind of a zero-sum game, right? Like every other spec gains that is now competing for those spots, right? And the Ret Pally can still be your way of bringing Devo Aura, right? If it's ever Ret Pally's not being brought, Holy Paladin is, like, you can just nerf Holy Paladin, buff Ret Paladin some amount in either direction, and that
very rarely happens.
I mean, it's hard to say why Holy Pally is like always good for raid healing, because it's not just the Aura Mastery on Devo Aura, although that has been really strong in the past, and that is something that's been nerfed as well recently, so that might lead to that healer spot being a little more open, and the Paladin spot also being a little more open to being another way, like bring Devo Aura from something other than a Holy Paladin. I'm not sure.
I've always thought it was like the amount of cooldowns we have, but I don't know too much about raid healing.
Yeah, I also am not a super expert on why the healing meta looks like it does in raid. But yeah, I mean I'm still in favor of Ret Aura being removed. Also, Ret Aura didn't work It
That is
didn't work
true, yeah.
almost all the time that people were running it. Like it worked on Tindral and Firac only, I think. I don't think it was consistently working on any fight up until then. Like if you were actually looking at uptime on that thing, it would proc like twice or something on Sarkareth, and you needed a tank to like spin around and get hit in the back or something to actually proc the damn thing, because it was just like only proc on tank damage, and it was looking at like post mitigation values instead of pre mitigation values, and so it was just never procking. So
Yeah, I remember in like season 2, it would proc. It was the opposite, where it would proc nonstop. If you were like logged out with Ret Aura or something, you would just have it up permanently. I don't remember what it was exactly, but it was
ooh,
like buggy in so many different ways.
yeah, so stupid buggy aura. I don't know,
Yeah,
not needed.
maybe that's why they actually got rid of it. They use this whole like guise of like, oh, we want to have more of that philosophy of having one raid buff per class, but realistically, they're just like, we can't actually fix this. Screw this. That's probably what they were thinking.
Yeah,
But
maybe.
what you were saying about like how specs cannibalize each other because of like they're bringing the same buff is actually so true, and it kind of feels bad because it's funny. I was like playing Guardian last night, and Greg, the Resto Druid, one trick was playing his Resto Druid, and I was just like pogging out. I was like, wow, dude, Loon Bear is popping the hell off. I'm like doing so much damage. I'm tanky as hell. And he's like, yup, Bear's doing good. You know what that means? Resto Druid is not going to be good.
Yeah,
Because like you just can't really have like two of the same specs. I mean, like in raid, there's like more lenience, but even that, like right now, I've been hearing there's a lot of contention on like what the hell do you even bring for the druid spot, because all the druid specs currently at least kind of suck. Like Moonkin sucks, Feral sucks, uh, Resto sucks. I mean, do you just bring a guardian druid to raid, and when the hell did that ever last happen? So there's been like a lot of discussion about that, and yeah, it's particularly bad in M plus. Like I used to play Bear Druid, and Growl used to play Resto Druid back in BFA when we were like at our at the beginnings of our streams, and that's what we were known for. But like, if you try to play something like that nowadays, that's not that great of a comp.
yeah, yeah. It's tough in M plus, like because the defensive power of Mark of the Wild, Fort, Og, Bronze Attunement, or Black Attunement are all so good. It's like, and then you can get offensive stuff from other specs, right? It's like Chaos Brand, Arcane Intellect, Sky Fury now. Um, if you duplicate a class, you lose a braid buff, right? And it's like that. It's hard for that to be right, It's very hard for that to be right. You'd have to have two specs that are both really good. And I agree. It does kind of suck that if you're just thinking about like if you're thinking about is Bear going to be good in War Within Season 1 M+, a big thing that affects that is like how good is Resto, how good is Moonkin, right? How good is Feral? Because if any of those are sick, you won't play the Bear unless it's also sick, right? Like you wouldn't play the Bear if it was good. You would play the DH even if it was a little bit worse, so you could get a unique raid buff, right? But if all three of those specs suck, then that's good news for Bear. But I don't know. This has been a dynamic that's existed for ages. In Raid, back when there were fewer raid buffs, I always remember feeling this with Monk, because Monk was basically like, oh yeah, we have a Brewmaster every tier, so like we don't need a Windwalker or a Mistweaver. And then they nerf Brewmaster in Raid, and it's like, oh, okay, well let's look at this Windwalker again, right? Like this might be the way to play this spec now. Which is like on the one hand good, like maybe you get to play a Windwalker because you otherwise wouldn't have, but it's just weird that it's weird how zero sum it is within each class, that if I want to play serve, my best bet to play serve is if BM and MM suck. Like that's tough.
Yeah, I mean, we've lived through the different stages of WoW, right? With raid buffs, like we've had zero raid buffs. We've had a world where we have some classes having raid buffs, which would be like, more of like BFA and Shadowlands, and even now. And then we have like a world where everyone has a raid buff. I feel like the worst one is by far the one where only some classes have
Agree.
it, which is like what we've been living in for a while.
Yeah, like Legion was kind of
where do you?
there was like a few
Yeah.
raid buffs that didn't have scrolls, and then every other raid buff had a scroll.
No,
and
no,
that was,
Legion had no raid buffs. It was
wasn't
BFA
there Mystic
that.
Touch still and Chaos Brand?
No. They introduced those in BFA, and then
Okay.
they have scrolls. So Legion was World where we had zero
None.
raid buffs.
Okay. I'm
Yep.
misremembering when that changed. Yeah.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
BFA when they brought it back,
Right.
and then
BFA,
like they
but yeah,
had
we had
scrolls and
scrolls
stuff.
for almost everything except for Chaos Brand and Mystic Touch. Yeah.
Maybe which world would you rather be in? Like personally, I actually missed the days of zero raid buffs. Like I understand why they have raid buffs. It's for like obviously to have like diversity in raid, but I personally feel like the forced diversity of specs has been problematic for the game. Because like for me personally at least, I remember back when I didn't really like play in high level raiding guilds. I mostly played in like heroic guilds and like low mythic guilds. We would kill like, maybe 1 to 5 bosses at the very most. And in these guilds I've been in, it's mostly been about the player skill because there's like pretty large player parity when it comes to their skill. And like we would have like 3 or 4 boomkins, but like it didn't really matter because like you would have like maybe like 2 of the boomkins, me being on one of them obviously with the big parses and the big numbers. And you really don't think too much about having multiple Mark of the Wilds or like having 0 demon hunters. But nowadays it feels like if you don't have a demon hunter, there's just something wrong with your raid. And I'm not too sure where you lean on that.
I agree. I think that, the no raid buffs was better. I think that raid buffs with scrolls is also fine. Like if having the raid buff versus having the scroll is like 20% better raid buff or something like that, I'm cool with that. But I do think it's just kind of, I hate the feeling of, okay, we're a guild with one Havoc Demon Hunter. Like we don't really need to recruit another one because it's usually not super good to have multiple. And
But
then
you need
like,
a backup.
yeah, I guess maybe we need a backup because if our Havoc Demon Hunter has less than 100% attendance, we can't game on the
Yeah.
days that they're not here. So maybe we need a second one for that or whatever. That versus a guild with no Demon Hunters, it's just like we will take any Demon Hunter with a pulse. Please apply. We need you so that we can actually play the game. I don't like that. So I think that no raid buffs or raid buffs with scrolls, which the scrolls could be, that could be a good way to buff the profession importance, right? Like depending on how you
That's
set
true.
up the scrolls, you could make it so that it's like, something that actually makes the, really ties into the different professions and there's one for each profession or something like that. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think it's not great. I do understand that they don't want us to have like the monochrome raid comps that have existed in previous tiers before the raid buffs. Like raid buffs are an easy way to make sure that every single class, except for DKs or whatever, sometimes that they don't give a raid buff to, shows
Well,
up.
so I'm actually curious
in the
about
comp.
that. So, like, I know people have talked about this in the past. Like, I didn't really raid that much before Legion, and people always talk about how, like, if it wasn't for raid buffs, you would just like class stack, right? But how true was that outside of the top end guilds? Was it really just like a top end guild thing? And even then, like in the top end guilds, how heavily were class
I
stacked?
think in
Because I
most
don't
tiers
remember
it
too
wasn't
much
too
in
bad.
Legion.
Yeah, there were a few tiers where it was like, well, I mean, like Spine of Deathwing is a good example. There's like 13 Arcane Mages or something. Unot, people were playing like 10 Aflocks or 5 Ellie Shaman, 6 Ellie Shaman, more. There were,
Was it just because they were like mega broken or what?
yeah, there were different reasons on different fights, right? Like it's like Arcane on Spine of Deathwing is just perfect for that fight, damage profile wise and the way the burn phase is lined up. And there's just no reason not to as well. If there's no reason not to. If there's a spec that's 2% better or whatever, you just play, and you have people that have geared versions of it, you play multiple of them. That didn't really, like Unot, for instance, that didn't really extend far below the world top few. And again, the world top few, they class stacked differently than each other on that fight as well. Like Method was all in on Aflocks and stuff, and Pieces was all in on Ellie Shamans, and that was actually kind of cool. And then most regular guilds played, regular looking comps. So
Yeah, they just played whatever they could afford.
yeah,
right?
like, maybe you
who
swap
has
up
the
to like
luxury
4,
to just have
right? It's like, oh,
Right.
like I main swapped on that fight to Ellie Shaman because the first and the second Ellie Shaman were really important, but the third and the fourth certainly weren't a big deal. So I think that would be fine. Like I think it would be fine if they, particularly if if they did the thing where they made raid buffs still exist, but because raid buffs are super high importance right now, right? Like if you have a demon hunter in a raid, the Demon Hunter, the contribution that the Havoc Demon Hunter's own button presses are doing versus the contribution that Chaos Brand is doing is about the same. Like, the Chaos Brand is doing almost as much damage as every single other button that the Havoc Demon Hunter is pressing all put together. It's a little bit less, but it's not much less. You could make that a lot smaller and still have the Havoc Demon Hunter be good in most tiers. Like, that would still be a safety net against people class stacking, right? Because the first Havoc Demon Hunter would still be worth a lot more than the second, and so you would still usually play one of each thing if the Havoc Demon Hunter only added 2% magic damage instead of 5. Problem with 2% magic damage is that, like, that's kind of feels low impact, but if you made it 5% magic damage or a scroll that did 3, like, now we're cooking. Now that I think would be my preferred path forward. I think you'd avoid the risk of super class stacking still.
Yeah, we've actually talked about that before too. I mean, it's kind of like the best of both worlds, like where if you're missing that one rig buff, then it's like, it's not the biggest deal. Like, it's not the end of the world. But at the same time, you aren't as enforced with like the whole stacking one specific OP spec, because like you said, if you bring that one Demon Hunter, it's still going to be more value than having a 4th Afflock or whatever it may be.
Yeah, exactly. Like, you want it to be enough that if people are min-maxing, they're going to bring it, but you don't want it to be so much that it feels like it's not worth playing without it, right? I think that it would be really nice for M+ as well. Like, if we could get it to a level where players as good as you and Growl would still be like, oh yeah, I like Resto Druid this tier, I like Guardian Druid this tier, let's push with Bear Resto, right? And it's like, oh yeah, would it be better if I played Vengeance? Like, okay, maybe, but it's not making me feel like this is stupid, right? Which right now you do feel like it's stupid to be playing 2 druids.
Oh, we're not the only ones who think it's stupid too. Like, I wouldn't be I would be hearing so much about it in my Twitch chat. Like, I'm sure every single person tuning in would be like, why are you playing 2 druids? Because that happened with Havoc Demon Hunter and Vengeance when they were OP. Mm-hmm. You remember in, I think it was beginning of season 3, where Fel Barrage was still super OP. Yeah, people were saying like, why would you play 2 Demon Hunters? Because like to a lot of players, in their minds, it's extremely weird to bring 2 of the same class. And it's like, look, you're still gonna play with a Havoc Demon Hunter just because of how OP it is. But obviously, like, once it stopped becoming OP, it was less true, and you started to phase out the Havoc Demon Hunter, and you would then bring in another DPS that would bring a different raid buff.
Yeah. 100%. Okay. Do we want to bang out this? We got a Patreon question that we can maneuver over to now. I've been surprised. I'm on a level with you guys and listeners and stuff. I was a little worried we wouldn't have much to talk about, but we ended up yapping about a bunch of random stuff, so that's good. That worked out well.
We're always gonna have stuff to yap about. I mean, that's just our specialty.
That's right, yeah. But
professional yappers.
Without professional yapper in chief Max here, I was like,
Max is like 1 tier above. Like, we had like a tier list. He would be like the ultimate yapper. Like, the amount of yapping Max does.
That's true. Yeah, that dude is he could go for. He didn't even need us here, but actually, dude, you remember at the start of this podcast there were all those comments that were like he talks too much or whatever. He really tried to like dial it back now and let you and me talk. It's been I think the pod's dynamic has gotten so much better as well over the past, like, especially, dude, that first episode, I don't know if you remember this one, but the first episode was like so rigid. I think that was mostly my fault, like, of
I mean, I don't think it was that bad. Like, yeah, sure, it was rigid, but I'm sure there's some appreciation for it too.
Yeah, it's just it's
but
not
yeah,
us,
I
right?
know what you're saying. Yeah.
Like, we were very free form.
We're trying something new. Yep.
Yeah, go off on a tangent. Plan to do a Patreon question, get into a tangent about the podcast dynamic type thing. Anyways, Patreon question this week comes from Aya. I'm decided that's how this is pronounced. With everyone hating on AUG and it being such a problematic spec, what is your all's opinion on the idea of Blizzard doubling down on the idea of needing a support spec in an M+ group and then adding more support specs to different classes, and with that giving it more variation, melee, range, different buff timings, different percent on buffs, shorter or longer times, and then balance all the support specs with each other instead of trying to balance one support / 2 DPS against 3 DPS. That, in my thoughts, could fix people feeling forced to play AUG, but can choose which support they want to take, and could increase meta variety as you could pick a support class that fits the CDs of your classes instead of having to play Shadow Priest Fire Mage as they are the best to line up with AUG. Thanks for answering in advance. Love the show. Heart. Thanks.
Thanks for the heart.
Yeah. My take on this is if one support 2 DPS, if that, like if we want to make support a separate role rather than being an interchangeable different DPS, we have to be really sure that there actually is one person who wants to play support for every 2 people who want to play DPS. I don't think that there is among my friends, but maybe there is among the broader population. Among my friends, it feels like maybe there's like one person who wants to play support for every like 5 or 10 people who just want to play DPS and who don't like the idea of playing support. So that to me would be a problem of like solidifying it as something that is in every group instead of having support being a different type of DPS that could exist, you know, and you could do either the 1, 2, or the 3 DPS, like the 1 support 2 DPS or the 3 DPS comp. I don't know if you have a similar opinion on how many people would actually enjoy, you know, supporting.
Yeah, so I've said this when they first released AUG. Like I enjoy the idea of having a support, just not what we have with augmentation. Like the supports I like to have in M+ are specifically the ones who are job doers. You know how in the past there were people who were known as like, you know, quote unquote mechanic rogues.
Yeah, bro.
Where
I remember like you go into Underrot and you go into the Kragmaw room
Yeah.
and it's like I'm gonna take care of 3
this guy,
maggots
you're
and
doing
a
all the jobs.
lasher.
Yep.
Yeah, and you guys are chill.
Or
yeah.
you're like opening all the cages in Dagor, because you look up like Dratnos'
That's
guide,
right.
which was like very famous on YouTube. You would look up like exactly how to open all these cages
Dude,
as a rogue. And
this was like right when I started making videos again. And it's just
Yep.
that video starts just fully zoomed in on my face, just jump scare.
that was a bagger. I mean, those were extremely popular back in the days.
Yeah, I
But
mean, it
yeah,
was a
like,
good guide. Yeah.
It was really good. I actually really liked those types of supports, like the ones that are job doers, the ones that kill explosives, the ones that like, you know, do the afflicted or whatever it may be, like CC the mobs and, you know, like handle certain things and like allow your DPS to blast, allow your healer to heal, and just like free up mental globals for whoever may be in your group. And currently, like augmentation sort of does that. Like augmentation definitely does a lot, especially in the TGP setting. Like in the TGP, all these augs complain about like, okay, so I gotta make sure I give you Wernstone, and then I gotta swap the Wernstone to the other person afterwards for the skip, and then I gotta make sure I like use my upheaval whenever I call for a stop here, and then I gotta make sure I use my oppressive roar at the specific time for the silent sigil. Then I also have to make sure I'm rescuing our goddamn priest. Then I have to make sure I'm like saying nice things to the tank to make sure the tank is feeling good, and make sure like I like give my healer a massage. And it does feel like the augmentation is doing a whole lot more than just this. But I don't know if they should be doubling down on the idea of like, you know, needing this type of support. It should just feel like something that's like a nice bonus to have. It just feels needed at the moment because of how M+ is designed. M+ is like designed in a way where currently it's not so much about damage, it's more about survival. And that's like the bigger problem, in my opinion at least. Like I prefer M+ to be, it's like a speedrun type of content. You're there to like try to time the content and figure out how to go faster, figure out how to optimize cooldowns, go do more damage. But currently it's just figuring out how to survive, and that's why the support is so needed.
Yeah. I put a meme that one of your competitors that'll be playing against you next week.
Oh yeah, Dratnos is guilty.
General,
right?
yeah.
That's
so
exactly what it is.
It's Frank will put it on the screen as well. He loves doing that. I think I agree with you as well. Like I like the job doing side of thing. I think that, you know, specs that buff other specs as well isn't a bad thing as well. There are clearly people that enjoy that. Having a couple more specs that do that, I think would be fine. Could be cool. Could be fun. But if you want to cement it into being a separate role, like the reason you could think of M plus right now as basically being mandatory to play one support, 2 DPS at the high key level, because it basically is, right? Like that support, the only support is AUG, but that comp is better than 3 DPS because every single, like the support role right now is basically defined as I do 90% as much damage as a DPS and I do 400% as much utility as a DPS, right? And it turns out like that is just bet you always bring one of those. The only reason you don't bring multiple is that they don't stack, right? Like two supports don't buff each other, and so that's the only reason you don't. Also, there's only one spec that does it, and so you can't even do it if you wanted to in TGP, but you wouldn't even if you could. I don't think it would necessarily, like I don't think that making more support specs and then kind of solidifying that as the reason, like, oh yeah, support is just an OP DPS that doesn't stack, right? So you can only bring one, but you always need one. I don't know. I think that I go back to like, I really think that's only okay if a third of DPS players would like to play support. And just from looking at like, you look at games like League of Legends, Overwatch, it's like, which is the role that has more people that want to play it versus the amount of people that do play it? And which is the role that is always needing to be filled, right? And is always the one that
It's
they're
always
trying to come
carry
up
or damage.
They're always trying to come up with incentives to get you to play. It's like, oh, play one support game and then you get to play whatever role you want next game. And it's like, okay, well, maybe we just shouldn't add the support role in the first place to be underplayed, and then we don't have that problem.
It sucks because there are definitely players out there who want to be playing support. Like there's definitely a minority, I would say, in most games where like people do want to play support. It's just there's got to be a better balance of like how many players in the group there are to the amount of support players.
Frank's yelling at me to explain the meme that we put up earlier as well. It's just an AUG evoker that has to call kicks, call stops, rescue the priest, tail swipe the second cast, spatial paradox, Zephyr the third mechanic, and after that pull in the next pack and kick in a mob in it, while the tank is AFK doing nothing basically.
Okay, the wrong part of this image is it's not the tank that's AFK.
Yeah, it's the Shadow Priest. Yeah, the Shadow Priest is getting rescued.
That little bastard's just sitting in the back with a 45-second kick. Like nothing's happening in the world, just like sitting there, ... and just like hit your
literally doesn't even have to walk to the spot, just gets rescued because it would be a damage loss to move. Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh man, I gotta move this for this mechanic. All right, how about you rescue me over?
Yeah. Oh man.
That's exactly Priest.
All right. Let's see.
I do have one more thing to say.
Go ahead.
I want to clarify. Last week, people were complaining about my hot take on push weeks. Man, I said it was going to be a hot take. Look, I'm not saying it's for the better of the game or anything. I didn't say like they should be doing this. I was just saying I enjoy push weeks. Like, I enjoy weeks feeling different from, week to week. And I enjoy just like having specific weeks be the week where a lot of people log in and play. Like I think what people are complaining this with is the idea that push week means off weeks are bad. And off weeks don't need to be bad. Like the only reason why we're thinking off weeks are bad at the moment is because we're thinking about like raging, bolstering, what else is there? Bursting, etc. And with how they're doing affixes now, like Dratnos, I don't know how much you've been playing the beta M plus affixes.
I haven't played too much of it now.
Oh, they're actually like really enjoyable. Like I've been enjoying both affixes. And I mean, there are like times where you get really weird overlaps, and it's like, all right, how the hell are we supposed to play this affix with this boss fight? But like aside from those quirky moments, like it still feels good to be playing in those weeks. Like I get that some players they would prefer if every single week was the same and they're just like always pushing for IO score. But to me, like like I don't care too much about IO score. Like I care more about like M plus being fun and like the dungeons feeling different from week to week, as I've said.
Yeah. So
maybe it's not for the best of the game, but I don't care. I'm just saying like I enjoy how it is.
Yeah, I do think it's you got your head bitten off a little bit for a take that was basically like, here's what I think would be more fun for me, and you weren't saying that they should do this or anything. It's just like that was your perspective.
That's right.
I noticed a lot of you jerks in the comments seem to be coming to our podcast and then getting mad at us for giving our opinions. So think on that for a sec before you write your next angry comment at my friends.
It's okay, Janos. You are the man of the people after all.
No, Growl's the man of the people now, dude. The top
Okay,
six
well, he is
comments
the
are
cat
already
of
going to
the
be.
people.
Yeah, we need to get him. We need to get him back on.
In fact,
on the
we
show
were
soon.
actually gonna bring Growl onto this episode because Max
That's
is
true.
too busy with his weeb game, and
Yeah,
for some reason he's missing. Okay, it looks like he's probably back right now. But
he was away on
whatever.
Discord, and so we just sent it. But yeah, we were trying to get him for a bit, but he's too big time for us now. He's man of the people. He's out there, getting his crowds together.
That's
Yeah.
right.
Anyways, yeah, on the push week thing, I do agree with you that like, so to some extent it's a little bit zero sum, right? Like the good weeks, some of them being good comes at the expense of the bad weeks being bad, right? Like if you especially want to play one week, that it does mean that you want to play less the other weeks, right? But it doesn't have to be like it was you remember BFA season 3 when you could get a tyrannical void week or a fortified enchanted week, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, this week is 4 levels easier than the other week. It doesn't have to be like that gap. Like I imagine if there was just a week where it's like every key you do this week gives you 40,000 gold, right? Like people would do more keys that week. It would be a push week, right? But it wouldn't
That would
actually
be
be any
sick,
different
actually.
keys,
Holy.
right?
Yeah, it would be a push week, but it'd be fun.
Yeah, I mean, and it would be like, oh, log in, it's key week, right? Like you could have that without necessarily making the other weeks less fun, and I say that also like in the sense of like just if the affixes were sort of like that as well, right? Like I think that particular idea wouldn't be good for a lot of reasons, but if it's just like, oh yeah, the affixes are slightly better this week, right? And it's like, okay, that's enough of a reason that everybody logs in this week, but it's not enough of a reason that you feel like you can't compete if you don't play that week, right? And it's like, oh yeah, we didn't get that week, we'll play a different week, it's fine. As long as that feeling is preserved, I think it's okay to have push weeks. I think you could also do it, like I said, I think on the last episode, you could also do it by just having some like midway through the season breakpoints that are where some rewards get tabulated or whatever, and so you kind of need to push on that week.
That would be great.
So that, like that, because the way that M Plus works, right, obviously, is you get more gear over time. So there's some incentive to just play the last week of the season when you have the most gear, and to play the most at the end of the season. But if you put some kind of mid breakpoints through the season, that could add some of that kind of stuff, and that could give you the push weeks without giving you the dead weeks as well. Because I think if there are dead weeks, it's a big problem. But I think if there's push weeks that are like slightly push weeks, I think that's fine as well. And I definitely do agree with you that feeling of every person on my friends list is doing keys this week, it was a cool feeling, and it would be a little bit of a shame if that does get lost. On the other hand, if keys are good every week, a lot of those people maybe are just going to do keys every week. Like if you make keys good enough and fun enough, I know a lot of M+ers that would just do M+ until they
I'm actually excited
until
to
their eyes
see,
bleed,
like,
right? Yeah.
I am curious how it'll end up in Warfin. Like, are there just going to be a whole lot more people playing M+ every week? If so, that'd be great.
Yeah, I mean,
But
I'm sure
I
we'll
also
see with
feel
that
like-
graph. Like maybe the graph just drops off after 3 weeks because everybody's like, okay, I've had enough of this and it's not changing.
Yeah, speaking of the graph too, I feel like the whole push week dynamic doesn't really affect a lot of players.
Yeah.
Because like for most players, when we think about when I think about push weeks, what do I think about? I think about bursting, spiteful, incorp, afflicted, right? Like those are all the EC affixes, but for seemingly a large amount of players, those are some of the hardest affixes to deal
Bursting,
with. Like, incorp,
bursting is like the
bursting.
nightmare affix and +7 pug or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I it's funny too because like sometimes I would be like, if it's like the beginning of a push week, I would have that in my title, right? I'd be like streaming and it'd be, all right, push week begins, and then people would tune in and they'd be like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's bursting. How the hell is that a push week?
Yeah.
But like that just kind of goes to show like how little people even think about these push weeks, because like for a lot of players, every week's a push week, or like whenever they're gaining gear, that's a push week.
Yeah, wholeheartedly agree. I think that's I think as well, now that we have the affixes in the low keys as well, like I don't know, there still will be push and and less push weeks right down there, right? Like the affixes aren't going to be all balanced equally, but if they're all fun affixes, I don't think that's a big deal. I don't think that's a problem. I think it never really is that big of a problem in low keys if the affixes add a little bit of variance in what level keys you can do. It's only when the mechanism that they do it is because it brutally murders you at a certain key level, and it's just like, oh yeah, Sanguine is going to add 100 zillion extra health to this dungeon and it's going to feel awful to play against. But if it's just like, oh, this week I'm more powerful than I am on another week because this affix is slightly easier to exploit than the others, like that's I don't think that's going to be a problem for those key levels. But I'm just excited to see the experiment. Honestly, like the experiment of what they're doing with both the low keys and the high keys, I could easily see them being wrong about, say, not having affixes in 12 or higher keys. But I'm still just excited they're trying it. And, I'm pretty confident that it would be easy for them to change their mind. Like, if it just turns out that we do season 1 and all the high key players are like, we want the affixes back, we want the Xalatath affixes like the low key people have, like, they could just do that easily. So I feel like it's just good. It's like this season, whether they learn that this is the perfect equilibrium or not, they'll learn what direction they should take it in next, right? They'll learn what they should try next, and I'm hyped to sell for that.
Honestly, I mean, them doing things M plus related at all is like a huge plus, because like historically they have not given a crap about M plus, and it's always been a mini game. I mean, it still kind of is a mini game people talk about all the time, but I am happy that they're doing something, even if it's like not necessarily a great thing. Like the fact that they're cooking on M plus is a huge plus.
Yeah, agree. All right, on that note, I think we have yapped for long enough for this week's PoddyC episode. We'll be back next week. Probably not with you, Dorky, right? You're gonna be up playing in the TGP next weekend. So
actually, yeah.
Busy.
Speaking of TGP, dude, this weekend's gonna be crazy. You guys better tune in. Holy moly!
That's right.
Are you excited, Dratnos?
Oh yeah, I mean, it's crazy how many good teams there are. There are literally 9 teams that finished with the same points as each other in Proving Grounds. Like, that is unprecedented. So
and
we've got
5 of the 6 of them are in the first cup.
Right. Yeah. It's gonna, and only 3 of those make it through to Globy finals. So that's gonna be,
a bloodbath.
I mean, absolutely. Yeah. Teams getting eliminated on day 1 and 2 as well. So one of those teams at least will be eliminated in the first 2 days. It's gonna be high stakes. It's gonna be high pressure. I don't know. I mean, I love TGP. I think the MDI was really exciting last time around, but TGP has always been my favorite format to watch. So I'm hyped. And also, we get to watch people suffer through bolstering and Sanguine and all these old affixes. Knowing that we never have to play them again as viewers, we can just wait for the new expansion and never do another Sanguine key, and we get to watch all the TGPers struggle through it. So that'll be fun.
Look, I at least had fun with Sanguine during the time trials. Like even though Sanguine generally sucks, I had those moments where it was like, oh, we actually managed to save 10 seconds here because we did Sanguine super clean. We did like beautiful grips and knocks and movement, and like our damage is perfect, and the healers taunting out the mobs at the right time. Like sometimes when things click, it just feels really good.
You and I agree on this, right? Like the feeling of doing a Sanguine pull and then looking at the HPS meter and not seeing Sanguine on it is like, that does feel good. It's we have our problems with Sanguine, but I agree with you that it is an affix that can have fun parts of it, and the most fun part is in a super coordinated group, like trying to do stuff like TGP.
Thing.
Yeah,
it's got to be a tank thing.
Yeah, I mean, well, the healers taunting stuff out or DPS players taunting stuff out as well, or using good knocks, using good stuff like that. But it is mostly a tank thing. Like if you have the mobs casting and moving, and you like space them properly, and you do like a perfect sigil right when the first few die or something, grip the others out, but not one that's about to die. It's like you feel so good. Yeah.
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 Yo.
Yeah. All right. On that note, Podsta la vista, everybody.
Oh yeah, I was supposed to use. Well, Max is gonna use it next week, anyways.
Oh, dude, you can yoink him. He's not here. You can.
It's okay. Podios.
Okay. Podios.